happen, but I'm glad that our core is back.
What makes you believe so much in this group?
I think last year, Twitter kind of blew up last night about a comment I made on my.
Sophie Cunningham just walked back into an Indiana Fever gym after 6 months of the hardest rehabilitation of her professional career. 6 months of grinding through plyometrics, mental battles, physical setbacks, and the kind of quiet, thankless work that never makes highlights and never trends on social media. 6 months of watching her teammates play basketball on television while she sat in a training room wondering when, or if, her knee would ever feel the same again. And the first thing she saw when she finally walked back through those doors, Caitlin Clark shooting drill, 30 consecutive three-pointers, not one miss, 30 in a row, working off movement the entire time. Catch and shoot off screens, off cuts, ball after ball dropping through the net like it was the most natural thing in the world, because for Caitlin Clark at this point in her career, it genuinely is. When someone asked Sophie what she thought of what she was watching, she didn't reach for a polished answer. She didn't give you the diplomatic teammate response, the careful media-trained quote designed to generate no controversy and reveal nothing real. She said Clark is in MVP form, and the way she said it, flat, direct, almost matter-of-fact, made it crystal clear this wasn't hype for the cameras. It wasn't a teammate doing a promotional soundbite. It was someone reporting what she saw, the way you'd tell someone what the weather looks like outside, just stating fact. And that quote carries weight because it came from someone who'd spent 6 months on the outside looking in, someone who had to earn her way back to even being in that gym. And the first thing she witnessed when she got there was Caitlin Clark making 30 consecutive three-pointers look routine. That's a warning to the rest of the WNBA, and it came before the season even started. So let's get into everything. The injury, the rehab, the contract situation that Twitter turned into a drama that didn't exist, the new roster, the 2027 cap picture, and what Sophie Cunningham's return actually means for an Indiana Fever team that is quietly building towards something the league hasn't seen in a long time. Comment Sophie and Cece if you're excited to see these two finally back on the court together, and let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning, because the Sophie Cunningham injury story is more complicated than most people realized at the time, and even more complicated than the headline suggested. An MCL tear is not a 6-week thing. This isn't a sprained ankle where you rest for 2 weeks, do some light jogging, get taped up, and get back on the floor. An MCL tear at the professional level involves a full structural disruption of one of the primary stabilizing ligaments in the knee. And the frustrating thing about ligament rehab at this level is that the gap between the ligament has healed, and I can actually play basketball at full speed without thinking about it is enormous. And it's a gap that takes months to close, not weeks. Sophie was honest about all of this when she finally got in front of reporters. She said she felt like she got cleared 10 different times because the medical staff kept being extra cautious, kept running numbers, kept wanting to see more before they were willing to sign off on full clearance. And for a competitor like Sophie, someone who, by her own description, shoots it straight and would have said something if she felt hesitant, that process was genuinely frustrating. Full clearance didn't come until February, not December, not January, February. And even after that, she acknowledged the mental side was its own battle entirely separate from the physical. Your brain remembers the exact moment the ligament gave out. It stores that memory somewhere deep and protective, and even when the tissue heals and the numbers look right and the doctors sign off, the brain doesn't just automatically trust the knee again. It keeps checking in. It keeps flinching on cuts it doesn't need to flinch on. There were still days, Sophie admitted, where the body was fine, but the mind was lagging behind. Still hesitating, still asking the question, still not fully trusting what the tissue was telling it. The moment she knew she was truly back, not cleared on paper, but genuinely back, came in a pickup game. She made a hard cut, landed clean, and only after the play did she realize she hadn't thought about the knee at all during it. Didn't check in, didn't flinch, just played. That was the moment, and when she described it to reporters, she kept the language deliberately understated. She said the body's responding and the knee is good, not I feel amazing, not I'm 100%, just that the body's responding and the knee is good. That's how someone talks about their body when they've been through enough to understand the difference between feeling good and being ready. It's a subtle distinction, but it's an important one, and Sophie understood it. Basketball shape is also its own thing that no amount of gym work can fully replicate. Sophie put it plainly. plainly. You can run suicides all day. You can do every conditioning drill ever invented. You can get your body into exceptional cardiovascular shape on a stationary bike or a track. But until you're on the court playing basketball and making decisions at speed, reacting to defenders, cutting and catching and shooting in game situations, you are never fully in basketball shape. The game demands something from the body and the brain simultaneously that no training protocol can simulate. It has to come from playing. So Sophie played a lot of pickup, 1-on-1, 3-on-3, fly drills, all the small repetitive things that build the neural connections between body and brain that make you feel like yourself in a game. It was, she said, kind of like a normal offseason, just with a lot more rehab attached to it. And then February became March. March became training camp, and Sophie Cunningham walked back into an Indiana Fever practice facility and saw 30 consecutive three-pointers and realized she was exactly where she was supposed to be. While Sophie was grinding through rehab, the internet was busy constructing a dramatic narrative that had almost nothing to do with reality. And it's worth unpacking this in detail because the real story is actually more interesting than the fake one Twitter invented. Sophie had made some comments on her podcast about her contract situation. The comments were taken out of context, clipped, stripped of nuance, and circulated by accounts looking for drama. The narrative that emerged was that Sophie was unhappy in Indiana, that the Fever organization was underpaying her, that she was essentially being pushed out the door, and that the whole thing was some kind of falling out between player and front office. None of that was true, not even close. Sophie had to come out personally and kill the narrative. She went on Twitter and said, "Flat out, I'm gonna shut this down right now. I'm not mad about the money, I just wanted more years because I love it here." Read that again. Not mad about the money, wanted more years because she loves it there. That's the entire story. The issue was never dollars. The issue was term length. She wanted to plant roots somewhere. She's approaching 30 years old. She wanted security, a home, a place to build something long term. And Indiana, with Clark and Boston both approaching max eligibility in 2027, was structurally limited in what kind of multi-year commitment they could make without putting the organization in a difficult cap position down the road. Those are two completely different conversations. Money versus years. But social media collapsed them into a single drama because that's what social media does. And the locker room narrative took damage it absolutely did not deserve because of it. Sophie also confirmed something else the accounts were spreading as fact, that Indiana was her only offer. That was false. She received multi-year offers from other teams. She had real options. She chose Indiana on a one-year team-friendly deal anyway, because when you find a group of people who make you fall in love with basketball again, you don't trade that for extra years somewhere you don't have it. Money is real, but the thing Sophie was describing when she talked about her teammates, the joy, the connection, the feeling that something special is being built, that's harder to find and harder to walk away from. Now, here's what was actually happening on Indiana's end. While all this played out publicly, General Manager Amber Cox was doing exactly what general managers are supposed to do, exhausting every option before locking the roster in. Specifically, Indiana was running the numbers on Atlanta Smith and Azora Stevens, two front court players who would have added significant size and rim presence to the roster. Both wanted maximum contracts. Indiana evaluated whether the cap math worked and whether either player fit the system Stephanie White was building. It didn't, and they didn't. Smith ended up signing with Dallas. Stevens went to Chicago, and once those doors closed, Indiana announced Sophie. The delay wasn't the organization wavering on her. It was the front office being professional and thorough. You don't shortcut that process just to avoid a Twitter news cycle. And the conclusion they reached, that breaking up the Treslecious trio of Clark, Hull, and Cunningham for a max front court player who doesn't fit how Indiana plays would have been a mistake regardless of cap room, was the right one. Clark, Hull, and Cunningham isn't just a fun nickname. It's a real on-court identity built over time. Spacing, movement, shooting off cuts, reading each other's positioning. All of it works because those three understand each other's tendencies deeply. Clark draws so much defensive attention that everyone around her needs to be an immediate threat the moment she kicks it out. Sophie shooting off screens and cuts creates exactly that problem for defenses. If you stay attached to Sophie to prevent the three, Clark has a clear lane to the basket. If you sag off Sophie to help contain Clark, Sophie punishes you from distance. There's no clean defensive answer for both problems simultaneously. You don't dismantle that system to add a front court player who doesn't fit the pace Indiana runs. Amber Cox understood that, and history will probably be kind to that decision. Pull Sophie off this roster, and what Indiana loses isn't just a scorer or a rebounder, it's a specific kind of player that Stephanie White's system actually needs to function, and that's worth spending some time on because it doesn't show up anywhere in a standard stat sheet. White has been direct about what she wants from this team defensively in 2026. The Fever ranked 7th defensively in 2025. That's not acceptable for a team with championship aspirations. White wants Indiana in the top 3 defensively, and she wants more fast break opportunities generated off defensive stops. Sophie shoots off movement, guards multiple positions, and pushes pace naturally. She's not an add-on to that vision, she's a central component of it, but basketball fit is almost secondary to what Sophie brings as something closer to a protector, and that reputation was built well before Indiana. In a June 2025 game against the Connecticut Sun, Jocelyn Sheldon poked Clark in the eye. Then Marina Mabry shoved her. These weren't accidental contact situations. They were physical provocations, the kind designed to get in someone's head, test whether there are consequences for going after the star player. Sophie's response was immediate and unambiguous. She grabbed Sheldon on a layup attempt, took the flagrant 2, got ejected, and didn't flinch about any of it afterward. The message to the rest of the league was clear: cheap shots at Clark come with consequences. You are not doing that for free. And when people bring up Misha Hines-Allen, who Sophie went head-to-head with while every other player on both rosters was trying to get as far away from the situation as possible, what they're actually describing is someone with rare composure in physically escalating situations. Everyone else scattered. Sophie walked straight toward it. What makes Sophie's physicality different from just being aggressive is that it's controlled. And that goes back to something most people treat as a biographical footnote. She earned a Taekwondo black belt at 6 years old. That's not a one-time achievement. That's decades of training in how to read physical confrontation, respond proportionally, and stay mentally calm when someone is actively trying to get inside your head. She doesn't swing wild. She doesn't lose her composure. She doesn't foul out in the fourth quarter when Indiana needs her on the floor. That combination of discipline and competitive toughness is genuinely difficult to find in a player who also needs to function as a primary shooting threat. Now, critically, Sophie isn't being asked to handle all of this alone in 2026. The roster Indiana built around her changes the equation significantly. Monique Billings and Misha Hines-Allen, yes, now a teammate, add front court size and rim running that the Fever didn't have in previous years. Billings is an exceptional athlete capable of playing above the rim in ways that stretch the floor vertically. Hines-Allen is one of the more physically imposing forwards in the league. Sophie's own quote about having Hines-Allen as a teammate now rather than an opponent was blunt and accurate. So glad we're on the same team. Tasha Harris and Raven Johnson bring defensive pressure at the guard spots that takes real load off both Clark and Mitchell. Johnson in particular has impressed quickly. Sophie described the chemistry between them as pretty elite for a very short span of time, which from someone who doesn't reach for compliments easily is meaningful. Kelsey Mitchell is still there. One of the most dangerous scoring guards in the league, capable of creating her own shot from anywhere on the floor. Mitchell's decision to sign another one-year deal to stay in the same cap position as her teammates heading into 2027 tells you everything you need to know about what that locker room feels like from the inside. Teams call, money is real, and Mitchell chose Indiana anyway because of what she called family vibes. Specifically her relationships with Boston, Clark, Hull, and Sophie that she said she just couldn't shake loose and walk away from. Aaliyah Boston is locked in on a 4-year, $6.3 million extension, the largest contract in WNBA history at the time it was signed, with her salary immediately jumping to over $1 million for the current season. Boston is one of the smartest, most fundamentally sound big players in the league. She sets screens that actually free shooters, plays the pick and roll at an elite level, and understands how to operate within a system that asks her to facilitate rather than dominate. Lexi Hull is healthy and back in the wing group alongside Clark and Sophie. That matters more than the raw numbers suggest, because Hull's understanding of Clark's tendencies and where she needs the ball in transition is the kind of thing that takes a full season to develop and can't be taught. The one-year contract situation makes complete sense when you zoom out and look at what Indiana is building toward in 2027. Both Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are approaching maximum contract eligibility. Those extensions are going to require significant cap space, and Indiana needs to be positioned to sign both of them without gutting the supporting roster around them. A long-term big money deal for Sophie would have complicated that math in ways that might have forced the organization into difficult choices down the road. The one-year team-friendly deal solves that problem. Sophie stays. The core stays intact. The chemistry that took a full season to develop stays together. And when 2027 arrives and Indiana needs to extend Clark in Boston, the two players most essential to the organization's long-term identity, the cap room is there to do it. Kelsey Mitchell's one-year deal operates the same way. She's betting on herself, betting on the team, and staying in the same position as her teammates so the organization can do what it needs to do when the biggest extensions hit. That kind of front office work, keeping the core together, passing on max contracts for players who don't fit the system, building cap flexibility for future extensions while maintaining the competitive window right now, doesn't generate attention when it goes right. Nobody writes the headline about the smart roster decisions that preserved a championship window. The headlines come when it falls apart. Amber Cox deserves credit for the fact that it hasn't. Let's come back to where we started, because 30 consecutive three-pointers deserves more than a mention. Sophie kept coming back to the release when she described what she saw, specifically how consistent it was from rep to rep. Clark wasn't standing still waiting for the ball between shots. She was working off movement the entire time, catch and shoot, off screens, on the move, and the ball kept going in 30 times in a row. That kind of consistency in a drill setting tells you something real about where someone's mechanics are. You cannot fake your shooting form for 30 consecutive repetitions. If there's something wrong in the mechanics, and a hitch in the release, inconsistency in the footwork, anything off in the kinetic chain from feet to fingertips, it shows up long before rep 30. The fact that it didn't show up tells you the mechanics are genuinely locked in at a level that's automatic, not deliberate. But it wasn't just the shooting. Sophie described specific moments in camp where Clark throws no-look passes that leave veteran players scrambling. Not because the passes are off target, they're perfect, but because Clark sees the angle a full 2 seconds before anyone else in the gym does. The ball arrives at a spot before the receiver has fully processed that the spot is open. That's not something you develop, that's a quality of court vision that either exists in someone's basketball brain or it doesn't, and Clark has had it from the beginning. What's developed over time is the trust to use it consistently. Clark also came back looking physically different, not bigger, actually leaner, and Sophie connected that to a deliberate choice Clark made about managing her body for a long season. Clark told reporters that taking care of her body is probably the most important thing right now, and you can see the logic. A 44-game WNBA season played at the pace Indiana runs breaks players who aren't built for it. Clark dealt with enough injury time in 2025 to understand exactly what happens when the body isn't managed correctly. She came back built for endurance rather than burst. Lighter, quicker, engineered for the long haul. Sophie's assessment was simple and direct. Clark is in MVP form, and the way she delivered that line made it clear she wasn't performing for reporters. She was just telling you what she saw. Sophie Cunningham spent 6 months on the outside, 6 months of watching the sport she loves from a training room instead of a basketball court. 6 months of plyometrics and pickup games and mental battles and medical staff telling her not yet, almost, a little longer. And when she finally walked back into that gym, the team she came back to gave her an immediate answer. Caitlin Clark hitting 30 consecutive three-pointers on the first day of training camp isn't a warm-up drill going well. That's what happens when someone has spent months treating every off-season session like it counted. That's what it looks like when a player at the peak of her abilities takes an off-season seriously and shows up to camp ready to go to work. But beyond Clark, what Sophie found when she walked back in was a team that had made the same choice she had. Kelsey Mitchell chose Indiana over longer offers elsewhere. Boston signed the biggest extension in league history to stay. Hull came back healthy, new pieces arrived that fill real needs, and Sophie herself left multi-year offers from other organizations on the table to take a team-friendly one-year deal in a building where she said she fell back in love with basketball. Players don't make those kinds of choices about workplaces they're uncertain about. Players don't walk away from guaranteed money for locker rooms that feel like just another stop. Every single one of these decisions tells you something true about what that building actually feels like from the inside, and no interview answer communicates it as clearly as the decisions themselves do. The 2026 Indiana Fever are deeper than last year, more physical, built around a core that has now consciously chosen each other twice in a league where rosters shuffle constantly, and keeping a group together even once is genuinely rare. White's coaching staff has a clearer defensive identity to implement. The cap situation is positioned intelligently for the extensions that matter most, and the star at the center of everything just walked into training camp and hit 30 30 consecutive three-pointers on day 3. The rest of the league has had all offseason to prepare, so has Indiana. And from everything Sophie Cunningham described when she walked back into that gym, Indiana has been preparing with a purpose. Comment Sophie and Cece below if you're excited to see these two back on the court together where they belong. Like, subscribe, and hit all notifications so you never miss a video. Click the video on the screen and we'll see you in the next one.